Hey everybody, Randy Patterson here with Boomerocity. And I have a fun little interview for you guys who love to read books like I do. And this particular book is very informative. It's long, it's deep, and if you'd like to get into the weeds on a subject, especially when it ties to music, then you're going to absolutely love this book like I do. It's written by a gentleman who, believe it or not, I didn't know who he was until about 12 years ago when he first invited me to be a part of a country music survey for a magazine or a tabloid. I say a tabloid, that sounds nefarious, but it's a free newspaper, let's call it that, that was given away in Nashville. If you're in Phoenix, it's much like the New Times Weekly. In fact, I think they used to be owned by the same company at one time. And he asked me or Boomerocity to contribute to their country music survey. Have no idea how he heard about me, but for several years I got to contribute to that. It was a lot of fun, and I hated that that Nashville scene gave a, or quit doing those surveys because they were just a lot of fun and very, very informative. However, fast forward to today. The gentleman's name is Geoffrey Himes, and he has written a great book called In Law Country. And it's how Emmylou Harris, Rosanne Cash, and their circle fashioned a new kind of country or new kind of country music between 1968 and 1985. And it is absolutely fascinating. A lot of names are mentioned in there that you're going to know. I don't want to give it away because I want you to buy the book. I also want you to listen to this interview because we talk about some of those names. And it's just absolutely fascinating. If you like to see the inner workings and how things intertwine, who influenced who, all that kind of stuff, then this book is a must have. You can order it online. I'll have the link on the website if you go to boomerocity.com. And if you're listening to this on the podcast, you'll want to go to boomerocity.com, boomerocity.com. If you're watching this through one of the video channels, same thing. You want to go there. So, without any further ado, this is my first interview of what I hope are many more to come with music industry great Geoffrey Himes. Until next time, this is Randy Patterson with Boomerocity. Take care. Hello, Jeff. Jeffrey, I'm sorry. Jeffrey, after all
I
these
like your
years,
backdrop there.
you're just a little partial. So, hey, I want to thank you for something other than the obvious being taking the time to meet up with me. But you approached me years ago, probably 12 or so, maybe 13 years ago, to participate in your surveys that you ran, your country music surveys in
Right.
Nashville scene. And I don't know how you heard of me, but I was flattered and honored that you reached out to me. And I think I participated in every one I was invited to. And, for a small timer like me at the time, I was flattered and honored. So I want to thank you for that, for giving me that bit of credibility in that genre there. So,
Well, you're welcome. Thanks for participating.
yeah, it was a lot of fun. But I loved your articles and all your contributions. I hated to see it end, and I complained to the publication. They didn't listen to me, obviously, but it was too bad they took that turn. But because I
Yeah.
think they're missing out on something fun that you provided all the time. So,
Well, thank you.
uh, well, I love your book, and that's why we get to talk. And I'm glad and grateful that you took the time to chat with me. And I love what the label that you've come up with because I think it's very applicable, and I would love for you to kind of tell viewers that will be seeing this um, the story behind your book, In-Law Country.
Well, there's this group of people that I talk about in the book. Primarily, there's Emmylou Harris and Rosanne Cash and Rodney Crowell and Steve Earle and Guy Clark and Ricky Skaggs and Sharon White and Brian Ahern, and that all worked together, often were married to each other or related to each other. Arlene Carter was Roseanne's stepsister. And but more importantly than that, they had sort of a common musical mission or character. And it always struck me that something important was going on here that wasn't being recognized as a more than just an individual here or individual there, that there was an actual movement, an actual community that was making its mark. And that they were, and even at the time, I thought it was impressive that these people were doing very ambitious artistic work, sort of bringing in Dylan-esque lyrics and Beatle-esque harmonies and traditional country back into major label country records and having hits. I mean, there's a lot of people who've tried to do this, but these people were actually, having hits on radio and on the charts. And I felt like, and as time wore on, I wrote about these people a lot. I interviewed them all, and it sort of struck me that, you know, nobody was sort of talking about this as a movement. And part of the problem was there was no catchy name, that there was, like outlaw country, most obviously. Um, so I came up with this idea that I wanted to write a book. I would provide the name, I would provide the argument for why this was an actual movement, and I would provide an argument for why it was important and unusual. And that was the book. So,
Very cool. So, how would you? One of the questions I had from the get-go in reading the book is how would you differentiate this genre of in-law country from outlaw country, from Southern rock, from Americana, and any folk, any of those similar genres? What would you say would be the key things that differentiate in-law from all of those others?
well, as you know, well, Emmylou was sort of the person who sort of kicked this whole thing off. And she
Hmm.
obviously came out of that California country rock scene where she was collaborating with Graham Parsons
Right.
and that whole Poco and Flying Burrito Brothers, that whole scene in California. And they were trying to bring elements of rock and country together, but they were doing it in a way that was not working on country radio. They weren't interested in that sort of piece of the puzzle, the sort of, breaking through to that country radio audience. And Emmy Lou, who says nothing but good things about Graham to this day, took what he was doing and adjusted it to so it would reach that audience. A lot of the credit goes to her husband, Brian Ahern, who was the sort of
Mhm.
genius producer who came up with a sound that was different from the Burrito Brothers, different from Poco. Uh, and it was more clear, more precise. Um, the tones were more perfect, the rhythms were perfect, and he had this way of clearing out a lot of clutter in the sound, so you heard these acoustic instruments, and they could like hold their own against electric guitars and keyboards, and that made a huge difference. And the fact that Emmylou and Brian were married couple sort of leads further weight to this idea of an in-law movement where these people are
Mhm.
not only writing about marriages and the problems and rewards of married life, but they were living it and using their own experiences as material for these things and then working together on those songs. It was very um, holistic, I guess is one way of putting it. So that's one
Mhm.
thing. And the Outlaws, Willie and Waylon and um, Chris Christopherson, all these people that I'm writing about, they admired those people, but there was a different emphasis in these in-law songs. They weren't writing about the lone guy out on the road on his horse or his tour bus or his, pickup truck or whatever, going out and having adventures. They were writing about adult relationships, people who were in marriages that were either working or not working, but they were struggling to try to make that work and try to, you know, pay the bills and stuff like that. So it was it was it was not that sort of male loner music that you had
Right.
with Willie and Waylon. It was more of this relationship music. I mean, Roseanne once told me that this was one of the first times I interviewed her. We were talking about, country and stuff, and she said, I didn't grow up listening to country, which is odd because my father was
What?
Johnny Cash, but
Yeah.
I always thought he was my father, and that was a separate category altogether. And then, I was listening to Tom Petty and Fleetwood Mac like everybody else my age. And then one time day came and my heart got broken. And I went out in the car and just listened to country music all day. And I realized that country music is not about, dating music, about falling in love or meeting somebody for the first time. It's about, you know, adult relationships. It's about marriage. It's marriage music. And that sort of clued me into what was distinctive about this music. That, it's marriage music, but it's marriage music different from the marriage music of like Loretta Lynn or George Jones or those
Right.
people, because these are baby boomers and they've come of age in an era where um, there's not there's no assumption that the husband is the patriarch and the wife is there just to support him. There's an assumption that married partners are equals and that they have to negotiate things and make things work so that both people are happy and both people can have interesting careers or interesting wives and be involved with the kids and stuff like that. So it's marriage, but it's a different kind of marriage. And because it's a different kind of marriage, it needs a different kind of marriage music. And I think that these people were filling that vacuum.
Country music without all the messy dysfunction, right?
Well, there's some dysfunction in these songs, but it's um, people working on a equal playing field. Not
Yeah, yeah. Do you do you think, I mean, this gets maybe a little bit inside baseball. I worked in Nashville for about a year until the pandemic sent everybody home. But one thing I picked up being there and only being at my level in the business, I was not working in the business in Nashville, but I spent my spare time going to, showcases and things like that, networking. One thing I picked up on very quickly is Nashville's a very cliquish town, and it's very difficult, as many an artist has said, that it's very difficult to break big in country music or in Nashville in general. And even though these people had the pedigree, Emmylou, Rosanne, others, did they meet resistance with this in-law brand of music because it was different, because it wasn't, Joe Sixpack and the gun rack, that kind of thing. Because I know you've got your thumb on the pulse there. Was there a lot of that?
Well, the important thing to keep in mind is that this movement was not born in Nashville. It was born in Los
True.
Angeles. That's where Emmylou and Brian were living. Um, Roseanne grew up there with her dad in Southern California. Rodney, his first really paying job was being a song scout and harmony singer for Emmylou in California. So they were separate from Nashville. So they were sort of insulated from that herd mentality, that pressure to conform, and they were able to try things. And so that was one factor. Um, and and there was there was definitely skepticism about Emmylou early on that
Mhm.
she had um, she had some early hits off those first couple of records, and people said, "Oh, she's just doing it. She's just successful because she's good looking and she's doing Beatles songs." And she said, "Oh, I'm going to prove them. I'm going to sing Loretta Lynn songs and then some bluegrass songs." And they when you in Nashville, if you have hits, you have credibility, no matter whether people think you deserve it or not. And Roseanne, of course, had credibility because of her dad. But being the child of a famous musician, it's always a double-edged sword. There's always people
Yeah.
are interested. It's easy to get entree, but there's skepticism about whether you deserve it or not. And
Mhm.
she definitely faced that and had to prove herself again and again. Um, so and, and and then Ricky, of course, he came from out of the bluegrass world. Um, so which is by 1979 or 80 when he first started releasing those records was, you know, pretty separate from commercial mainstream country.
Mhm.
So uh, all of them had the good fortune to be separate from Nashville so they could develop a distinctive sound and not sound like everybody else. But they also had a commitment to play the game to a certain extent, um, to get these records on the radio and reach that audience. These were Southern people who wanted to sing to Southern uh, fa country fans.
How much of an influence, because they were from California, Emmylou and others, that did the Bakersfield sound have on them? What was there any influence? Was there any blowback? Any conflict?
Yeah, there was a um, there was a lot of interaction at that point when they were sort of still unknown and but they, Emmylou covered some Merle Haggard, Buck Owens songs early on, Together Again, and what's the Merle song? I can't remember. She obviously um, loved that kind of music. Graham obviously loved that kind of music too.
Hmm.
And, Graham famously sang a Merle song on the Grand Ole Opry when the Byrds made their one and only appearance there. Uh, the Bakersfield sound was more rocking than what was coming out of Nashville at that time.
Hmm.
Uh, but I think that there was more of a influence as, they loved those records rather than they were actually talking to Merle or Buck about things. Um, but it's more, Graham and Chris Hillman and Clarence White were all featured in the book. They were all very influential. And then also those Texas songwriters, Towns Van Sant, Guy Clark, then later Rodney, and Steve, that was another direct influence. So,
Aside from the reasons you've already mentioned, are there other reasons why you pretty much referred to Emmylou as the mother of the genre? Were there any other
well, she's
points?
the one who had the breakthrough. She
Yeah.
had she and Brian created that sound. They found a way to do what they wanted to do in a way that worked on the radio and had hits. And then almost everybody else either wrote songs for Emmy or played in her band or were friends of hers, played on those records. Ricky, Rodney, uh, the Whites, all these people were sort of, got their start working or with or for Emmy and then, branched out on their own later. So it's
Hmm.
sort of inarguable that she was the sort of linchpin of the whole thing.
Yeah. She's a wonderful lady. The only time I've gotten to see her perform was for a homeless charity around Christmas time at one of the churches there down on Broadway, or
Mhm.
yeah, right on Broadway, right off of it. And gosh, I mean, just inside that church, even it was like, oh my gosh, you know.
Yeah.
And I've interviewed Phil Madeira, who plays for her in her band, and great guy too. In this, you've mentioned a few names, and I pulled a few out. I mean, we could talk all day about all the stuff you've written in there, but one of the things that I got was, when you talked about Graham Parsons, I kind of drew an Elvis Presley comparison when I read your take on Graham, and it was like Elvis, um, Graham and the Burrito Brothers played at the Ryman and weren't well received. I mean, that could have been a very detrimental moment for in-law music. But what's your take on that?
Well, the in 1968, when Sweetheart of the Rodeo came out, it was recorded in Nashville, and the band CBS twisted some arms and got the Byrds on the Opry. There was not it was, first of all, it was not the right moment for the, the audience and the music to connect. And secondly, as great as that album is, it does not have that the same kind of sound that Brian heard sound of, like, a very tight rhythm and very clear picking. And uh, it was more, it was one of those cases where McGuinn was more interested in making a 1950s country record than he was in making a 1968 country record. And, it was a great 1950s record, but it was doomed to
Nobody
be
was interested.
out of step with everything else. So,
Right.
and it was the first Byrds album that really did not have a hit singles, or the second one after Notorious Blues Brothers. And it, but it had so much influence over everything that happened in that border territory between country and rock for the decades, even today. Vince Gill's wife and her sister named themselves Sweethearts of the Rodeo when they had formed their duo. So Emmylou's album, The Ballad of Sally Rose, is basically all about Sweetheart of the Rodeo. So,
Well, in talking about Emmylou, I drew another Elvis Presley tie, and that was her use of the TCB band.
hmm.
I thought that was genius on her part. What are some of your thoughts on that?
Well, Graham had hired that band to make those last two solo albums of his and to tour with them. And so when he died, before the second album could come out, his managers wanted to, like, use that band, use that momentum in some way to keep going. And Emmy was the obvious choice because she was a prominent voice on those albums. She had the talent, and so she sort of inherited that band when Graham died. And of course, it was a great decision because there was a fabulous band. So,
Mhm. Very cool. Chris Hillman seems to be a common thread in your book, and the influence on in-law country. I get tongue tied sometimes. Great man, loved this book. I love his heart. What are some Speak a little bit more about Chris and his
yeah,
influence on
Chris,
this.
everybody points to Sweethearts as the first really great country rock album. And he says, no, no, no. I had some songs on Younger Than Yesterday, which is two albums before, that were country records, like Time Between and another one. And he says that's really the birth of country rock right there. Because he had grown up in California playing country music and bluegrass. So
Hmm.
it was in his blood. And, when Graham joined the band, you know, Chris, it wasn't like he was the first one person to bring country music to the band, but Chris told me, yeah, at last I felt like I had an ally in the band, somebody else who loved country music as much as I did,
Right.
because Crosby and McGuinn were skeptical, at least in the beginning. Um,
Hmm.
so, and Clarence White, we shouldn't underestimate him, who was uh, who played on Sweetheart and played on a bunch of Byrds albums and eventually joined the Byrds. A brilliant guitarist who started out playing bluegrass, was one of the first acoustic guitar soloists in bluegrass, and a huge influence on Tony Rice and other people. an amazing guitarist, and picked up an electric guitar and invented the string bender guitar and had a big influence on those Byrds things too, and formed a bridge to the in-law movement to come.
Very cool. What what's been your feedback on the book so far?
Well, people like it. It's still, I mean, it's a long book, so people are still reading it.
Mhm.
But yeah, I'm pleased. Everybody says good things about it. I think is that I'm hoping that it will make people reconsider how they think about country music history, that there's this movement that is as important as, Western swing or rockabilly or bluegrass or all these other sort of subgenres of country, but has not had the name or the concept to sort of grab people's attention. And I think hopefully when people tell this story from the future, they'll have to take that into consideration. I mean, I think it's, obviously these people did not have the in-law country name at the time that I'm
Right.
retrospectively applying it. But, you know, when bluegrass started, nobody called it bluegrass. They called it country music, or they called it
Hmm.
old time country music or string band music. It was only later that it became called bluegrass. And I think that's analogous to what's happening here.
I agree. I agree. What what has been the biggest surprise or was the biggest surprise when you were putting this book together? I mean, obviously when you write a book, you have a pretty good idea of what you're going to do, maybe a preconceived notion, but then
Hmm.
were there any surprises even for you, which probably you're probably a hard guy to surprise, would be my guess.
I mean, one decision I made early on is that I didn't want to just write about lyrics, although lyrics are important to a lot of these people. That sort of the Dylan-esque folk movement that was so important to the Byrds was also important to Emmylou and Rodney and all these people. That sophistication of the words, Dylan was important to Roseanne's dad, as you saw in that new movie, The Complete Unknown.
Hmm.
So, but I don't like it when people write about music as if lyrics are the only thing that matters. That, to me, the music and the lyrics and how they go together is what really makes a difference. And so I wanted to write about the sound of these records and the importance of Brian Ahern's arrangements, the importance of Clarence White's guitar, Albert Lee's guitar, Ricky Skaggs, playing all these different instruments and bringing a bluegrass flavor, and his bluegrass colleagues into these recording sessions. So uh, I'm glad I did. I think that's an important part of the book. So, and
You've met,
I also wanted
go
to
ahead.
write about the, the importance of Townes and Van Zandt and Guy Clark as mentors to these people. Those parties they hosted in the early 70s when nobody knew who these people were, but were sort of like a graduate school of songwriting for people like Steve Earle and
Hmm.
Rodney Crowell and um, John Hyatt, and a bunch of young writers who nobody knew, but you know, there was this standard of quality of songwriting that Guy and Townes expected you to meet to take you
Hmm.
seriously, and that having instilled that standard, it stayed with people through the next decade or so, well, to this day actually, which is why those songs are so well written.
Well, and you've mentioned Dylan a few times. I mean, gosh, when you talk lyrics, you got to talk Dylan, right? And so you obviously have drawn the correlation or the impact he's had on indirectly into to in-law country. What was your take on the movie?
Um, I like the movie. I think that more than I expected to, actually. I think that it's the rare biopic that really takes the music seriously. That when he comes into town in New York and he's like this scrawny little kid, 20-year-old kid from nobody's heard of from, Minnesota. And, he seems kind of laughable until he opens his mouth and starts singing those songs. And then this is like this shock of recognition about how great these songs are. And I think that, and then, and that makes it clear that those songs are really what was important, that people recognize those songs even without the hype, that there was something about
Right.
the songs themselves that were important. And that, and then the later part of the movie is when he's, with the two different women and trying to make his way. He's so focused on writing that that's more important to him than anything else. He'll, you know, he's always like scribbling on paper, trying to remember chord changes, pushing people away who want him to write a certain kind of song or do a certain thing. And it makes him kind of a jerk in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
And I'm not going to, no one can really defend that kind of behavior, but it does sh demonstrate how important the writing was to him and that
Yeah.
kind of focus that you have to be a creative artist.
In a
I think
little from a
the thing
little.
that carries, I think the other thing that carries on to the in-law country movement is that, Emmylou, before she met Graham, was a folk singer, and she was in Greenwich Village in the sort of late 60s after the initial big boom had come and passed. And there was sort of this group of people like David Bromberg and Paul Siebel and Robert and Linda Williams, Brian Bowers, that were just sort of hanging on still in those coffee houses downtown, trying to, get their songs heard and stuff. And we're not, there was not the buzz that there had been when Dylan and Baez and Van Ronk had been there. But that was her starting point, that kind of those songs that, where it was the quality of the lyrics and the melody that had to connect with an audience without the help of a band or, you know, an arrangement or stuff like that. That the songs themselves was really the king. And that carried over into her career when she was picking songs. And that's why she was drawn to Rodney, because she recognized the quality of those songs much the same way that Pete Seeger recognized the quality of Dylan's song in the movie. And that that emphasis on good songs that were ambitious, um, really marked the movement. And she brought that with her.
Two more questions for you. These are a little off the mark, but I think somewhat related. Were you by any chance at the Ringo T-Bone Burnett Q&A last week?
No, I live in Baltimore, so uh,
Oh, okay. I thought you were in Nashville. I'm so sorry. I was just wondering, have you heard the album and what's your take on it?
I did hear the album. I thought it was good. I thought T-Bone did a great job on it, and
Yeah, I agree.
everybody loves Ringo. So,
Oh yeah. And so what's next for you? You've got this book out.
well, it
Is
so
there some
happens
activity
that
on there?
I just finished a book on Willie Nelson that should be
Oh.
out. It should be out in October. It's a different kind of Willie book. It's not about his life so much as it is about telling his life story through his recordings. So I go through
Hmm.
all the singles and albums from like 1956 to 2014 and sort of tell about his personality, his mission, um, and his life, his story through those recordings. The legends always get changed and enhanced with time, but the recordings stay the same. So I think
Hmm.
they're in some ways they're the most reliable source, and also they're, they're the reason we care about Willie. It's the music. He's a colorful guy. You know, everybody. That sort of you know Zen Buddhist priest of marijuana, which is all very enchanting. But there's a lot of people like that. None of them, wrote songs or recorded songs like those. So that's what I'm focusing on. And
He's
then I
kind of
also
the
have
top.
I actually have a book of poetry coming out in May. Um,
Huh.
and then we'll see what's next.
Very cool. Well, my wheelhouse is music. So when this Willie thing gets, your Willie book gets close to coming out, if you don't mind, I would love to talk to you about it. And if I can get a sneak peek at it ahead of time, I'd love it. And
All right.
my door is always open to you, Geoffrey. It's the least I can do for what you've done for me with these surveys. I love, like I said, I love being a part of those, and I thought they were a lot of fun, and I hated to see them go. But I love your book. I love your style of writing. So anytime you've got something going on, I'd love to open my door to you, and let's do one of these.
Well,
Okay.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
All
Please
right.
send me a
Well,
copy of this when you edit it and
oh, I
get
definitely
it
will.
ready.
I'll
Yeah.
have the link ready for it and all that. It'll probably go out next week, actually. So
Okay.
I put my stuff out on Wednesdays, so you'll definitely get the link to it. So
Okay. That's great.
all right, my friend. Good luck on this, and we'll talk to you down the road.
Thank you very much, Randy.
Take
Bye
care.
bye.